You asked for it, so here it is, another Gen 1 Pokemon type comparison. Thank you so much for all your positive and helpful feedback on our video about normal types in Gen 1. We've got lots more videos like this planned. Now, onto the video. Back during Generation 1, Bug-type and Grass-type Pokemon were both considered to be rather weak from an offense-oriented standpoint. The damage-dealing moves of these two types are resisted more than any other, meaning that neither has much sweeping potential as other types. What's more, the moves of these two types can be rather lackluster. On top of that, the Pokemon themselves sometimes leave much to be desired. We'll examine how both Bug-type and Grass-types stack up in these regards, and we'll then draw a conclusion on which is worse for offensive usage in Gen 1. Effectiveness and accessibility. In Generation 1, Bug-type moves were resisted by 4 types: Fighting, Flying, Ghost, as well as Fire, and in terms of super effectiveness, Bug-type moves hit Poison, Grass, and Psychic Pokemon for double damage. Having more types being resistant than weak to bug moves is not great, especially if you're an aspiring bug catcher. As such, Bug-type moves won't be useful against about 1/4 of the types in Gen 1. The super effectiveness against Psychic types is a solid advantage. However, there wasn't much accessibility for Bug-type moves back in the day. None of them appeared as TMs, which means that the only way to use a Bug-type move, for the most part, was by using a Bug-type Pokemon. The only exceptions are Zubat and Golbat, who learn Leech Life at level 1, and Jolteon, who learns Pin Missile at level 48 in Red and Blue, but at level 36 in Yellow. The latter example is arguably the most viable usage of a Bug-type move in Generation 1. Comparatively, Grass types are potentially in a worse spot during this era. Their moves are resisted by a whopping 6 types: Flying, Poison, Bug, Fire, Grass, and Dragon. While initially depressing for the tree huggers out there, the flip side helps to balance things out, as Grass-type moves are super effective against Ground, Rock, and Water Pokemon. There's no denying that having double the resisted types as super effective ones is a bad place to be when considering your offensive options. However, being able to take down Rock and Ground types is pretty useful, as these types often appear on the same threats, of which are some of the sturdiest walls in Generation 1. Moreover, Water types are quite common, so being able to deal a sizable amount of damage against them is a point in the favor of Grass types. The good news for the Erica fans out there is that Grass types have decent accessibility for their 2 best moves, Mega Drain and Solar Beam. You can get TM21, Mega Drain, from defeating Celadon City's aforementioned gym leader, and you can get TM22, Solar Beam, from the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island. Effectiveness comparison. Let's face it, no one's going to run a Bug type on their team to counter Poison and Grass types when excellent coverage moves like Earthquake and Ice Beam are available. Also, most Bug types can't really stand up to Psychic types despite being able to hit them for super effective damage. The only Bug Pokemon that learns the 2 best moves of their type in this gen, Pin Missile and Twin Needle, is Beedrill, which gets absolutely demolished by even the weakest fully evolved Psychic type due to being part Poison type. If you're thinking about using a Golbat with Leech Life against Sabrina, or human opponents that will most likely be running 1 or more Psychic types, you're going to come up against the same problem thanks to Golbat's partial poison typing. Ironically, as we briefly mentioned before, the most viable use of a Bug type move in Gen 1 is on Jolteon, an electric type that can learn Pin Missile. And, even then, it's almost not worth the move slot. If you're running a Jolteon on your team, you've most likely got Thunderbolt, Thunder Wave, and Double Kick, plus another move. Pin Missile wouldn't be the worst choice for a 4th move, however, it can be argued that Agility, Rest, Reflect, or Substitute would be better. Through cross-examination, Grass types fare a great deal better when it comes to effectiveness potential. Sure, damage-dealing Grass-type moves are not very effective against over 1/3 of the types in Gen 1, however, they don't need to be in order to apply pressure to your opponent. Mega Drain's always a good option whenever you're going up against a Rock, Ground, or Water type. It hits your foe fairly hard and heals you for 50% of the damage done. Healing moves are pretty rare, and those that deal damage while healing are even more so. For that reason, it's often better to run Mega Drain over Solar Beam, as, in addition to the aforementioned reasons, Solar Beam needs an entire turn to charge, which usually results in your opponent switching out to a Pokemon that resists Grass-type moves. With that said, it would be ignorant to overlook the excellent utility of the Grass-type status moves. Spore, Stun Spore, Sleep Powder, and Leech Seed are all viable in their own regard. Spore, which is only learned by Paris and Parasect in Gen 1 at levels 27 and 30 respectively, is the best status move in Red, Blue, and Yellow. A 100% chance to put your opponent to sleep is straight up broken, especially considering Gen 1's wonky sleep mechanics. The only reason it wasn't used more often is because it's locked to the Parasect line. However, Sleep Powder makes up for that last part by being learned by 8 different evolutionary lines. 75% accuracy isn't great, but it's not that bad. It's a 3 out of 4 chance to meet its mark. Stun Spore is about as viable as Sleep Powder, as it can be learned by the same evolutionary lines except the Venusaur one, and also has a base accuracy of 75%. Depending on what your team's core strategies are, one or the other will do the job. With that said, if you're struggling to decide between the two, go for Sleep Powder, as the sleep mechanic is easier to abuse than Paralysis in Gen 1. Last, but most certainly not least, is Leech Seed. After being set up on a target, it will drain 1/16 of its max HP every turn, and heal you for 50% of the damage dealt. This is a great way to passively heal a little bit every turn, but there's more. In Gen 1, Leech Seed and Toxic use the same damage modifier, so, to put it simply, when both are applied to the same target, the damage dealt, and the healing received, each turn is way more than it should be. If you set up both moves on turn 1 and then on turn 2, within 3 more turns, any affected opponent will faint. This isn't the most efficient way for taking out human opponents, but it can let Venusaur and Exeggutor, the only 2 Pokemon who can learn both Leech Seed and Toxic in Gen 1, cleave through in-game foes at levels much higher than them. After taking a close look at the effectiveness potential of both types, Grass-type moves are way more viable in Gen 1. Face-Off Breakdown, Bug-type Overview. In Gen 1, there are 6 fully evolved Bug-type Pokemon: Butterfree, Beedrill, Venomoth, Parasect, Scyther, and Pinsir. Out of these, we are going to exclude Parasect because it's also a Grass-type, which would skew our comparison results. Butterfree. Don't let anyone speak poorly of Butterfree. While it's not the strongest special attacker, wall, or sweeper by a large margin, it's excellent for in-game use throughout the early and mid portion of the games. Moves like Mega Drain and Psychic allow Butterfree to have decent coverage. On top of that, access to Stun Spore and Sleep Powder gives it some added utility. With that said, it doesn't learn any Bug or Flying type moves, dooming it to an awkward position of having no same type attack bonus options for offense, which greatly hinders its potential. For those of you out there who are screaming at your screens, Butterfree learns Gust! Gust in Gen 1 is normal type, for some reason. Beedrill. Similar to Butterfree, Beedrill is definitely usable in-game for the early and middle parts of your journey. However, unlike Butterfree, Beedrill has access to solid Bug-type stab moves in the form of Twin Needle and Pin Missile. What's more, it can learn Sword Stance and Agility, 2 of the best stat-increasing status moves in Gen 1. As such, combined with an okay base attack stat, and access to Hyper Beam means that Beedrill can potentially do a lot of damage to an opponent's team. Fun fact, Beedrill can learn Skull Bash. It's not very viable, but it gave us a chuckle when we thought about a creature with literal drills for hands smacking its tiny fragile head against its opponents. Venomoth. Venomoth exists as a pocket monster that fuses the best parts of Butterfree and Beedrill, while also having other benefits thrown in. As such, depending on the moveset you choose, Venomoth can be a decent special attacker or a debilitating utility option. Since this video is about offense, we'll focus on that kind of moveset. Like Butterfree, Venomoth can learn Mega Drain and Psychic, which are always decent coverage moves. However, it can also learn Leech Life if you want a Bug-type stab move, albeit an underwhelming one. As for Poison-type move options, you've got Poison Powder and Toxic, the latter of which is superior in most cases. Therefore, you can Toxic your opponent on turn 1, and then follow up with a barrage of Mega Drains, Psychics, and more. This kind of tactic would be even better if you set up a substitute immediately after using Toxic. Alternatively, you can use Sleep Powder on turn 1 and then pummel your foes with powerful moves. Scyther. Scyther is one of the best Bug-type Pokemon in Gen 1 due to having high attack and speed base stats. However, it doesn't learn any Bug-type moves whatsoever. With that said, it gets an even better stab in Wing Attack. In Gen 1, Wing Attack's base power is 35, which is pretty low. Although thanks to the stab bonus and Scyther's high base attack, it can do decent damage against most enemies. Let's not forget that Scyther can also learn excellent status moves like Sword Stance and Agility. That, plus its access to Slash and Hyper Beam, lets it become a dangerous sweeper, unless your opponent has a Rock type. With the exception of using Toxic to badly poison opponents, or potentially Mimic to copy a Ground type move, Scyther has no answer to rocky adversaries. What's more, those latter two moves aren't very viable on Scyther due to its stats being greatly geared more towards offense than utility or stall. Pinsir. With a monstrous base attack stat, Pinsir is another contender for the best Bug type in Gen 1. It hits harder than Scyther, but it's slower. There's a similar trade-off between the two Pokemon's HP and defense stats, which makes them appropriate rivals. Another similarity to Scyther is that Pinsir also learns Sword Stance, Slash, and Hyper Beam, making it a great sweeper. Moreover, Pinsir can learn Seismic Toss and Submission, allowing it to break through Rock-type walls. However, there are no Bug-type moves available for everyone's favorite Stag Beetle Pocket Monster. With that said, it doesn't really need a Bug-type stab to succeed against its opponents. Face-Off Breakdown, Grass-type Overview. Similar to Bug types in Generation 1, there are 6 fully evolved Grass-type Pokemon. However, one of these is Parasect, which we will be excluding due to it being both Bug and Grass-type. That leaves Tangela, Venusaur, Vileplume, Victreebel, and Exeggutor. Tangela. Despite having mediocre HP, attack, and speed base stats, Tangela is quite sturdy thanks to its solid defense and special base stats. This means that, for the most part, Tangela can hold its own in combat for a few turns. If it can use Mega Drain on targets that don't resist Grass-type moves, it can heal itself and stay in the fight longer. What's more, Tangela has access to both Stun Spore and Bind, meaning that it can make its opponents slower than itself in many cases, and then slowly squeeze them until they faint with Bind. Don't underestimate this tangle of binds. Venusaur. As the final evolution of a starter Pokemon, you can expect Venusaur to be strong in battle, and it is. It's one of the 2 pocket monsters that can use the dreaded Toxic and Leech Seed combo. However, against enemies that can't be poisoned or seeded, it can still hit them hard with a solid Body Slam or even a sneaky Hyper Beam. And let's not forget about its Grass-type stab, Razor Leaf. Thanks to well-rounded stats, Venusaur isn't lacking in any area, but this means it also doesn't shine particularly brightly in any either. Vileplume. Vileplume is another well-rounded grass and poison type, similar to Venusaur. The purple plant pocket monster is a fair bit slower than Venusaur, however, fills a similar niche. Vileplume has access to all the powder moves, of which Stun Spore and Sleep Powder are the most viable. It gets decent stab moves as well, Acid and Petal Dance. When faced with foes that resist its stab moves, it can unleash Body Slam or other strong normal type moves. Victreebel. Out of the grass and poison dual types in Generation 1, Victreebel has the best attack base stat, making it the best for physical offense out of the poison plant Gen 1 trio. With that said, its special base stat is on par with Venusaur's and Vileplume's, meaning it is a solid mixed attacker. While mixed attackers are often looked down on in today's meta, this was a viable tactic back in Generation 1. We will get into why, as it would lead us down a long tangent. If you want to learn more about that, drop a comment below and let us know. If there's enough interest, we'll make a video about that. Anyways, back to Victreebel. Not only does it have access to decent stab moves like Acid and Razor Leaf, but it can also pull off a Stun Spore and Wrap combo, similar to Tangela, though swapping out Bind for Wrap. For such strategies, Wrap is a bit better due to possessing slightly higher accuracy. On top of that, Victreebel gets Sword Stance and access to a wealth of great normal type attacks like Body Slam and Hyper Beam. This pitcher plant doesn't pull any punches. Exeggutor. Finally, a grass type with interesting typing. No offense to the aforementioned Pocket Monsters, but let's face it, Psychic type is one of the best types in Gen 1, only being truly outdone by normal types. With this excellent typing, great base stats, and a nice move pool, Exeggutor is arguably the strongest grass type Pokemon in Red, Blue, and Yellow. Like Venusaur, it's got the Toxic and Leech Seed combo. However, its base attack and special stats are high enough that you're better off going on the offense with this terrifying tree monster. By running Old Egghead as a mixed attacker, you can wallop opponents with Stab Psychic for huge damage, Stab Mega Drain for decent damage plus a bit of healing, and any of its normal type moves like Double Edge, Hyper Beam, or even Explosion if you want to go out with a bang. Why is it that this tree with eggs for heads can explode again? Matchups. Firstly, we need to mention that these matchups between Bug and Grass types in Generation 1 do not determine which type is worse for offense by itself. We've used the data gathered from our test battles in combination with our effectiveness and availability research to determine which truly is the worst type for offense in Gen 1. With that said, we don't think that either of these types is genuinely bad in the traditional sense. We just think that they weren't truly given the chance to exhibit their true potential in Gen 1 due to the limitations of technology in the Generation 1 games, in addition to some oversights on Game Freak's behalf. As for the 1v1 battles themselves, we've given each contender a set that makes them as viable as possible against each other, so that each Pocket Monster has as many chances to succeed as possible. We've done our best to square things up fairly. On top of that, we're taking potential critical hits into account, as well as stat drops and more. However, we purposely avoided including any evasion-related moves, as that would skew our results. Anything with Double Team can be a threat, and would likely only be taken out by luck more than strategy. So yeah, none of that. Without further ado, let's get to some battling. Butterfree matchups. Against Tangela, Butterfree comes out on top most of the time. Despite Tangela being a pretty solid wall, it can't stand up to a barrage of Psychics from Butterfree. This is especially true if Tangela's special stat gets dropped as a result of Psychic's secondary effect. What's more, Butterfree's double resist against Tangela's Grass-type stab very easily lets the insect shrug off Mega Drains. On top of that, Butterfree can use Reflect to drastically cut down on the damage it takes from Tangela's Body Slam and Bind. And it's not like Tangela can wait for Reflect to wear off, as it simply doesn't leave the battlefield unless the user switches out in Gen 1. What's more, using the Paralysis and Bind combo is simply too slow and inaccurate to yield a definite knockout against Butterfree if the latter uses Rest. When Bind inevitably misses, Butterfree can use Rest and rid itself of Paralysis while healing to full HP. At that point, Tangela needs to paralyze Butterfree again to stand a chance of defeating it. In this battle of attrition, Tangela's Bind PP will run out before Butterfree's Rest. Also, sleep strategies via Tangela's Sleep Powder won't help much, as Tangela's Body Slam doesn't do enough damage to consistently take out Butterfree before it can awaken and rest up to full HP, especially if Butterfree's Reflect is active. Even if Tangela sets up Sword Stance, its damage output still isn't enough to take down Butterfree consistently due to Tangela's naturally low base attack stat. Therefore, Butterfree snags easy victories against Tangela most of the time. Next up is Butterfree vs Venusaur. While Butterfree's Psychic is super effective against Venusaur, the latter's bulk lets it, on average, tank about 3 Psychics before it goes down. However, that's only if Venusaur doesn't heal itself through the use of Leech Seed. By stacking Leech Seed and Toxic, Venusaur's damage output snowballs very quickly. Butterfree can rest to restore its HP, but this does not help against the stacking effects of Toxic and Leech Seed. After setting up Toxic and Leech Seed, Venusaur can spam Body Slams until Butterfree goes down. Venusaur can out-heal and out-damage, so it won most of its encounters with Butterfree. With that said, if Butterfree's Psychic drops Venusaur's special stat, or it gets a crit, Butterfree can take out Venusaur before the Toxic Seed damage ramps up too high. As such, Venusaur is the winner in most cases, but this is a close one. Up against what's basically a slower, no Toxic Seed Venusaur, Butterfree does much better. Since it can outspeed Vileplume, Butterfree can put its opponent to sleep before Vileplume can do the same. This, plus Butterfree's super effective Psychics, nets it consistent victories in this matchup. The face-off between Butterfree and Victreebel is really close. Since these Pokemon have the same maximum speed, we gave all Pokemon in this test perfect DVs for fairness. The winner mostly depended on who got lucky and acted first. As such, the Pokemon that lands the first Sleep Powder wins. Since this was heavily luck-based and depended on a speed tie coin flip as well as accuracy checks, we had to change things up a bit to see who was the victor here truly. While Butterfree's Psychic can drop its foe's special stat for greater subsequent damage, Victreebel's Body Slam being able to paralyze its opponent is more valuable here. This is because the paralysis slows down Butterfree enough for Victreebel to always move first. Since Victreebel can take Butterfree down in 2 or 3 turns with Body Slam, even resting to recover all of its HP isn't enough to save Butterfree. Furthermore, if Butterfree decided to spend a turn setting up Reflect, this would only give Victreebel an opportunity to land a Sleep Powder, which would let the Pitcher Plant Pocket Monster set up Swords Dance to negate Butterfree's Reflect buff. Although this one was super close, we're going to give the edge to Victreebel. Butterfree stands no chance against Exeggutor whatsoever. The only edge the bug type had against most of its previous opponents was that Psychic is super effective against poison types. However, this doesn't help against the grass and Psychic type Exeggutor at all. In fact, Butterfree simply doesn't have any moves in Generation 1 that can deal with Exeggutor effectively. The best options for Butterfree's offense here are Double Edge and Hyper Beam, but since Butterfree doesn't get any attack boosting moves, its strikes won't do much damage against the bulky tree monster. Other tactics, like using Sleep Powder or Supersonic on Exeggutor, don't help very much, especially if Exeggutor sets up Toxic Seed. Trying to counterstall Exeggutor with its own Toxic won't help either, as the egg-headed beast can outperform Butterfree in this regard. We played around with a Psywave set on Butterfree to see if luck could help the insect monster prevail, but it was simply too inconsistent to let Butterfree achieve victory in every instance of its usage. Despite the clear type advantage on paper, Exeggutor triumphs remarkably easily against Butterfree. Beedrill matchups. We didn't expect this, but Beedrill could not take out Tangela at all unless it lands multiple critical hits early on. Tangela's bulk was simply too much for the bee Pokemon to handle. Tangela could tank Beedrill's Twin Needles with ease, even after Beedrill set up Swords Dance. Even Double Edge and Hyper Beam can't one-shot Tangela after a Swords Dance. Tangela's ability to put Beedrill to sleep via Sleep Powder and then Body Slam it into submission was consistently effective. Even at times when Sleep Powder misses, Tangela has the raw defense at full HP to last until the next turn so that it can use Sleep Powder again. Then, Tangela can counterattack with Body Slam until Beedrill's weak defense cracked under the pressure. This usually took 3 or 4 turns. Since Beedrill outspeeds, it can get lucky with landing critical hits and Sleep Powder missing, which lets it win a few times, but not as often as Tangela did. This one was kind of close, but Tangela prevailed more so than Beedrill. This one was also unexpected. Venusaur triumphs over Beedrill surprisingly often. Despite Beedrill having a massive advantage here, since Grass and Poison dual types have a 4 times weakness to Bug type moves in Gen 1, Beedrill just doesn't have the speed or power to consistently knock out Venusaur. Since Venusaur outspeeds Beedrill, it can use Sleep Powder on the insect monster to halt it in its tiny little tracks. After that, all Venusaur needs to do is spam Body Slam until Beedrill goes down, which usually takes 2 or 3 turns. Beedrill almost never gets a chance to set up Sword Stance due to being slower than Venusaur and getting put to sleep before it can act. In the cases when Sleep Powder misses, Beedrill needs to get super lucky with a crit to one-shot Venusaur. The only times when Beedrill actually won against Venusaur are when Sleep Powder misses, Beedrill sets up Agility, and then lands a critical Twin Needle on the next turn. Since this takes a fair bit of luck, it's not consistent whatsoever. As such, Venusaur takes this matchup easily. Okay, this one we expected. Although fairly similar to Venusaur, Vileplume is much slower and, therefore, can't outspeed Beedrill and put it to sleep in most cases. Furthermore, Vileplume has a bit less HP than Venusaur, so it can actually get one-shot by Twin Needle if Beedrill lands a critical hit. Usually, Beedrill hits Vileplume and takes out a bunch of its HP on turn 1 before Sleep Powder hits. Afterward, Vileplume needs to hit 4 times with Body Slam, or 2 or 3 times if it sets up Sword Stance, in order to put down the Beast. This is more than enough time for Beedrill to wake up and hit Vileplume with another swift Twin Needle. Therefore, Beedrill easily won most of the time in this matchup. We thought that this one would end in Beedrill's victory most of the time, however, this is simply not true. This matchup unfolded similarly to what happened when Beedrill went up against the other members of the Poison Plat trio, though resembling the face-off against Venusaur more than the one against Vileplume. Beedrill has a chance to one-shot Victreebel on turn 1, and the bug type does outspeed it, so you'd think this battle would be one-sided. Instead, what happened was, most of the time, Victreebel tanks the first Twin Needle and then lands a Sleep Powder on Beedrill. Since Victreebel hits pretty hard due to a sufficient base attack stat, it can knock out Beedrill with Body Slam in 3 turns, or 2 if it gets a crit. This happened before Beedrill could wake up and counterattack in most instances. The sleep mechanic is truly broken in Gen 1. As such, Victreebel achieved victory more often than not in this face-up. We should still mention that this fight is pretty close. We just got a mental image of a pitcher plant consuming a bee. Yikes. Exeggutor squashes Beedrill in pretty much every encounter between the two. Beedrill outspeeds the egg-headed monster, however, it needs a crit to one-shot or two-shot it, the latter being more likely. On the flip side, Exeggutor only needs a regular Psychic to take out Beedrill, no critical hit required. Due to being more consistent with its longevity and offensive power, Exeggutor easily takes another W under its proud leaves. Venomoth matchups. As they are both Sleep Powder users, this matchup's results came down to speed versus defense. Venomoth outspeeds Tangela, which lets the moth monster put its foe to sleep first. As such, Venomoth has a big advantage in this kind of battle. With that said, Tangela's got solid defense and special stats, so it can tank up to 4 or 5 Psychics from Venomoth, which gives the Tangela vines lots of time to wake up. However, once it does, Venomoth can put it to sleep again next turn fairly easily. Throughout our tests, the only time Tangela won was when Venomoth missed multiple times with Sleep Powder, which was rare throughout the course of any given battle. The only reason that made this battle somewhat close was Tangela's respectable bulk. In the end, Venomoth takes this win due to its superior speed, which lets it put Tangela to sleep fairly consistently. The venomous moth strikes again. Despite having another face-off between 2 potential Sleep Powder users, Venomoth still has a speed advantage against Venusaur. That, plus Psychic being super effective against Venusaur, lets Venomoth take this match easily. After Venomoth lands a Sleep Powder, it can take down Venusaur in 3 turns with Psychic, or less if it gets a crit. If Venomoth's Sleep Powder misses, Venusaur can counter with a Sleep Powder of its own, which, if it hits, allows Venusaur to set up Sword Stance and knock out Venomoth in 2 or 3 turns with Double Edge. We gave Venusaur Double Edge here instead of Body Slam because it can heal with Leech Seed to negate the recoil damage. However, thanks to Venomoth's speed, Venusaur doesn't get a chance to attack often enough to secure consistent victories. Therefore, Venomoth is victorious most of the time. Venomoth dispatches Vileplume even easier than it did Venusaur. Since Vileplume has no good options against Venomoth except using basically the same set as Venusaur, this outcome was easy to see coming. Venomoth can consistently put Vileplume to sleep and take it down in 2 or 3 turns with Psychic. In the event that Venomoth's Sleep Powder misses, Vileplume can put it to sleep. However, even if Vileplume lands a Sleep Powder, sets up Sword Stance, and uses Body Slam a few times, it doesn't have the power to take down Venomoth quickly enough before the Moth Monster can awaken and counterattack for a likely victory. The result is Venomoth winning against Vileplume consistently. As you can expect, the contest between Venomoth and Victreebel, the last of the Poison Plant trio, ends in Venomoth's continued success. Thanks to outspeeding Victreebel, Venomoth can once again put its foes to sleep and then unleash a barrage of super effective Psychics. The only times Victreebel triumphed were when Venomoth's initial Sleep Powder missed, and let Victreebel counter with its own Sleep Powder. However, like with Venomoth's previous 2 matchups, its speed and high damage potential allowed it to net another W. Finally, a bug type that can actually topple Exeggutor. It's about time. Thanks to Venomoth's superior speed, it can put Exeggutor to sleep before the reverse can happen. However, if Venomoth misses with Sleep Powder, Exeggutor can use its own Sleep Powder to send Venomoth to Dreamland. In the latter case, Exeggutor wins because it can easily 2-shot Venomoth, or 1-shot it with a critical hit, thanks to a powerful Psychic. Keep in mind that this is not very common, as Venomoth's faster movements allow it to put Exeggutor to sleep first more often than not, allowing the monster's moth to slowly damage the egg-faced fiend with Leech Life, while also healing to undo any damage it has taken. Even if Exeggutor wakes up, Venomoth can put it to sleep again without Exeggutor getting a chance to do anything. Due to moving first during any given turn, plus being able to heal itself, Venomoth comes out on top in this matchup, despite it being a close one. Wow, Venomoth is 5-0! They're truly doing Bug-type Pokemon justice. Scyther's matchups. Scyther's got a pretty good reputation for being a fast and hard-hitting sweeper in Gen 1. However, up against a wall like Tangela, Scyther's combat prowess is questionable, to say the least. We expected a Sword Stance boosted Wing Attack to do a lot more damage against the Grass type. However, at best, it still only 2-shots Tangela, but more often needs 3 hits to finish the job. Conversely, Tangela is able to put Scyther to sleep as it uses its first turn to Sword Stance. This means that Tangela can use its own Sword Stance to boost its power before laying into Scyther with Body Slams. It takes 4 turns for Tangela to defeat Scyther after buffing its attack. The key point to remember here is that Scyther needs the Sword Stance on turn 1 if it wants any chance of piercing Tangela's Vine Wreath bulk. Even Slash and Hyper Beam don't let Scyther win consistently against Tangela, so the latter takes a big W. Things end up similarly as the last face-off. Venusaur's bulk and access to Sleep Powder lets it endure wing attacks and other attacks from Scyther long enough to knock out the Bug-type monster with Body Slams. Again, Scyther needs to set up Sword Stance on turn 1 if it wants any chance of winning. Wing Attack's base power is simply not high enough by itself to be useful. What's more, Slash isn't strong enough to take down Venusaur in anything less than 3 turns, even with frequent crits. This, once more, gives the Grass type a chance to put its foe to sleep and then hammer it until it faints. With that said, if Venusaur misses with Sleep Powder, Scyther can 2-shot Venusaur with Wing Attack. To summarize, Venusaur wins this matchup, but it's a close one. For once, Vileplume finds victory. The battle between Scyther and Vileplume echoes that of Scyther vs Venusaur. The lack of speed doesn't matter much here for Vileplume as long as it lands a Sleep Powder. If it doesn't, it's in for a world of hurt as Scyther can 2-shot it with boosted wing attacks. However, the power of sleep prevails and nets Vileplume its first W. Scyther doesn't fare any better against the last of the Poison Plant trio. Although Scyther can knock out Victreebel with 3 unboosted wing attacks, Victreebel hits harder than its brethren. After putting Scyther to sleep, the Bell of Victory can buff its attack with Sword Stance and then take down Scyther in 3 body slams, or 2 if there's a critical hit. As such, Victreebel wins more often than not against Scyther thanks to the ever-powerful Sleep Powder. More of the same here. Poor Scyther gets completely shut down by Exeggutor's impressively thick trunk. There's no way Scyther can hope to take down Exeggutor unless it boosts with Sword Stance. This again leaves the bug type wide open for Sleep Powder. Once put to sleep, Scyther can't do anything besides get pummeled by Exeggutor's hard-hitting Psychics. Even as Scyther wakes up and counterattacks, it won't help much, as Exeggutor can 2-shot Scyther with Psychic in the event of a crit, or even a special stat drop. Even if it doesn't get a crit or a special drop, the possessed Coconut Tree Terror can knock out its Mantis-like foe in 3 deft hits, netting Exeggutor the victory in the majority of cases. Pinsir's matchups. I'm sure you're getting a bit tired of seeing Sleep Powder tactics trouncing bug types by now, so we'll keep Pinsir's section short, as it's basically a slower yet stronger version of Scyther minus the wing attack. Like Scyther, Pinsir needs to boost with Sword Stance on Tier 1 for any hope of victory, which, sadly for bug type fans out there, results in it getting put to sleep pretty consistently. As such, Tangela can set up Sword Stance itself before body slamming Pinsir into submission. This is an easy win for Tangela due to Pinsir learning no moves that are super effective against grass types. The same situation unfolds when Pinsir fights Venusaur. Venusaur opens with Sleep Powder and then pummels Pinsir with boosted body slams. GG Pinsir, but Venusaur can tank your body slams even after you boost them with Sword Stance. There's no getting past the sleep tactics for you, my bug type friend. Vileplume, as a weaker Venusaur, still defeats Pinsir more often than not. Sleep Powder, Sword Stance, Body Slam, you know the drill by now. Take a guess what Victreebel does against Pinsir. That's right, the tried and true method of Sleep Powder, Sword Stance, and Body Slam secures another W for the grass types. Last but not least in this one-sided affair, instead of literally bodying Pinsir, Exeggutor uses 2 or 3 Psychics to demolish the lackluster bug-type monster. Sorry Pinsir, you've got a cool design, but in Gen 1, you're just not very viable despite your awesome base attack stat. Conclusion. At the end of our battle tests, grass types won 17 times while bug types only won 8 matchups. Most of the latter's victories coming from Venomoth with his impressive 5-0 sweep. However, its victories, as well as Butterfree's, come as the result of using Sleep Powder, a grass-type move. The only face-off that resulted in a true bug-type victory was when Beedrill took down Vileplume, which was thanks to Beedrill simply having the best bug-type moves in Gen 1. We now have a lot of data from our exhaustive tests, and believe you me, clicking Sleep Powder that much over the last few days has given me insomnia-born mental exhaustion. Our battle data combined with the effectiveness and availability research clearly points to bug types being the worst type in Gen 1 for offense. They, sadly, don't get very many good moves, and the ones that are somewhat usable, which is still being generous, aren't even given to the most viable bug types. Jolteon gets Ping Missile, but Scyther, Pinsir, and Butterfree don't get any damage-dealing bug-type moves? Come on, it's simply not fair. On top of that, grass types have access to the best sleep-inducing move in Gen 1, and they use it to great effect. Their stab attacks are resisted by many other types. However, grass-type Pokemon don't need grass-type stab moves to succeed. They do just fine with normal-type ones at their disposal. As long as you give grass types a normal-type move, such as Body Slam, they can hold their own against types that resist them, as we've proven today. As a final note, we're very happy that bug types were given some love in the following generations. They can now take on many more threats thanks to getting better moves and other benefits from added mechanics and reworks. Shout out to Ribombee for being arguably the most viable bug type in Scarlet and Violet. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and consider subscribing. Due to positive feedback on the first video in this series, we've got more Gen 1 type analyses coming out soon. We'd love if you guys could drop a comment below to let us know what you think. Until the next video, happy battling, trainers!